Hello, and welcome to another installment of the Osgoode Mediation Clinic's newest series called Mediator Spotlight. I'm Josiah.
And I'm Stefania. We are both law students at Osgoode Hall Law School and community mediators at the Osgoode Mediation Clinic.
So in this online series, we will be chatting with practicing mediators about mediation generally, their unique career paths, and their experiences with the mediation process. Through these interviews, we hope to bring greater awareness about alternative dispute resolution and mediation specifically to our community.
Without further ado, we'd like to introduce our next guest, Mr. Frank Gomberg. Among his many accomplishments, Mr. Gomberg has mediated over 4,500 civil disputes in the Ontario Superior Court of Justice, including personal injury claims, insurance disputes, wrongful dismissal claims, and professional liability claims.
So welcome, Frank. Thank you for joining us tonight. So we'll just get started with our interview questions.
Sure.
So as a law student, did you see yourself becoming a mediator, and what ultimately ended up drawing you to mediation?
Well, so I graduated Osgoode in 1977. And aside from mediation in the labor context, I don't think there was any mediations at all ever. So mediation as a concept to resolve disputes either in the courts or not in the courts was not something that anybody knew about. So the answer is I never saw myself. I wasn't interested in labor law. I was interested in negligence law and torts and things like that. And mediation was just a sort of a twinkle in people's eye at the time. And nobody had come up with the idea of translating its use in labor to other areas. So the answer is I did not contemplate myself being a mediator, nor did I know what it even was.
Wow, no, that's interesting. And when did you learn about mediation then?
Yeah, so I was acting mostly for plaintiffs doing civil litigation. I was a partner at a firm called Thompson Rogers, which is probably at the time, maybe still, they were the largest personal injury law firm in the country, really. So I articled there, and then I became a junior to the Canadian equivalent of the King of Torts in the United States, a guy by the name of Melvin Belli is the King of Torts, and I worked for Ken Howie, and that's the way my career progressed, really for 10 or 15 years. I left there and I joined a firm that was run by former professor of mine at Osgoode, Marty Toplitsky, and I continued doing the same sort of tort work. And that's what I was doing when mediation suddenly burst onto the scene.
Wow.
Now, there were a few people who, the pioneers really were a guy by the name of Paul Torrey, a guy by the name of John Fiddler, and Cliff Handler. So those three were really the ones who started it. You're smiling, both of you, because the same names just keep going sort of around and around. So they started doing this probably around 1993, maybe something like that. So it's been around we're coming up to 30 years, but it only got going in about 90, maybe 93, something like that.
Wow, very interesting. Not that long ago, considering, but still, I guess, quite a bit of time ago.
Correct.
Yeah, okay, so we read on your bio online that you've actively mediated disputes in a variety of different practice areas. So do you have a main area of practice that you focus on today?
No, the main area, I guess, and it's kind of generic, is mostly insurance, personal injury, insurance policy issues, claims against long-term disability insurers, claims against one's own car insurer, medical negligence cases, lawyers' negligence cases. So those are the kinds of cases that I do. I'm sure you'll get to this, but one of the things that I particularly enjoy is trying to bring some compassion to high emotion situations, which the courts are really not very good at.
So it sounds like you practice mediation in a pretty wide variety of areas. And something we've touched on a little bit in our class is just how different mediation styles are appropriate for different kinds of mediation areas. And so as students, we've kind of been trained to use a bit more of a formal method with distinct phases. And we were wondering to hear about like what mediation style do you prefer to use? Do you like something a bit more structured, or do you take the more informal conversational approach?
Yeah, so that's a very interesting thing. There's all sorts of literature, which no doubt both you know about, dealing with more, I don't know what you call it, like touchy-feely experience. And I'm thinking particularly of narrative mediation and stuff like that. So what I do really is more, it's kind of, it's structured, but it's unstructured in its structure. Okay, so there's a beginning and an end to the mediations, and they tend to be done in a consistent way. All right, so there's some parameters to this, and then within the parameters, for example, we usually I do an opening describing to the person whose husband has been badly damaged in a medical negligence case. So I'm talking to everybody at the beginning, and I tell them what we're going through. That little speech is really for the benefit of the plaintiff. Okay, the plaintiff is usually, almost always, a neophyte, a first-time litigation person. All right, so it's different when you're talking to a professional litigant. They know what's up. Talking to somebody who's never been involved in a lawsuit before, which is most of the time the plaintiff, then I think it's part of my job, and it's done in a formal way, but the experience is not particularly formal, where I say something like, Stefania, before we start today, I want to tell you that I read the material, and what happened to your family is just absolutely abysmal. It's devastating. Okay, and we can't bring your father back. The only thing that we can do is shuffle around money, hopefully in a dignified way, because if we don't do it, somebody else is going to do it. And I want you to know that it's no better that it happened to you than it would be if it happened to me, right? Or my father, or my mother, or my brother. Okay, so is there a structure? Absolutely. Okay, I have to do that every day. Why? Because if I don't forge some sort of a relationship with you and with Josiah, okay, if I can't form at least that kind of distant relationship, the prognosis for getting the case resolved is very poor. All right, so the answer is, yeah, there's a joint session where I do my little thing, then I turn it over to the plaintiff's lawyer. Plaintiff's lawyer talks for as long as he or she wants to talk. The plaintiff then gets to talk if he or she wants to talk. That's extremely unusual. I wouldn't call it rare, but it's unusual. Okay, 25 or 30% of the time the plaintiff will say something. Usually they won't say anything because their lawyers told them not to. Okay, and when that's finished, then the insurance company's lawyer gets to talk to the plaintiff. Now remember, you guys are on the verge of becoming lawyers. You understand that lawyers have to talk to lawyers, and you can't have the plaintiff's lawyer pick up the phone and phone the other side, the insurance adjuster, nor can you have the insurance company's lawyer pick up the phone and call the plaintiff. Professional conduct don't permit that. So this is a first opportunity for the plaintiff's lawyer to talk to the insurance company. Okay, now I'm not that concerned about that, because plaintiff's lawyers talk to insurance companies all the time. They just don't do it in the context of a lawsuit where a defense counsel has been appointed. Okay, but no lawyer other than the plaintiff's own lawyer has ever spoken to the plaintiff about what's going to be happening. And I think that it's important for the mediator to explain to the plaintiff in the mediator's own language what's going to be happening. If the plaintiff has heard that from his or her lawyer, and the competent lawyers will brief the plaintiff on what's going on, because this shouldn't be a complete surprise. You're not walking in there at 10:03, having told your client what's going on at 9:57. That's not very smart. But I have no idea what they've told their client about what the mediation is, and I like to do it. So when somebody says to me, well, you know, I told them all about that, I say, yeah, well, I want to talk to your client for a few minutes. Okay, and the entree to the discussion is some empathy and compassion for what brings the person to the mediation. It's a long answer to your question. So there's a structure, and in the ones that by the way, in California, because I'm a member of an organization that John Fiddler was actually the president of last year, called the International Academy of Mediators. Anyway, in California, it's almost unheard of for anybody to do openings. Okay, they go right into caucus, and the mediator engages in shuttle diplomacy immediately without this introduction.
Interesting.
Yeah,
That's very interesting.
by the way, it gives rise to some interesting business development things, because I happen to think that these openings are valuable. Okay, however, if nobody wants to do openings, as far as I'm concerned, I'm the servant of the process, not the master. Okay, so as a servant of the process, plaintiff's lawyer says, we're not going to do openings, and the defense lawyers also, they've worked this out in advance. I'm not going to inflict openings on them, but I usually will say to them, hey guys, I want to do my little thing because I think it's important. And I don't think I've ever gotten an objection to that.
Yeah, for sure. That's definitely interesting. And I think that's also what we've experienced, that you kind of have a checklist of things, like a formal checklist of things that you want to cover when you go in, but it depends on the client and the situation and how you becomes more inflexible.
Yeah, you know, I probably should have a checklist. I don't have a checklist. Okay. And the reason I don't have a checklist is I think that it's important that it appear to be an ad lib type of thing, where I'm looking at the person and talking to them and not looking down at a checklist. So I'll take my chances that I might miss something. Okay, maybe I forget to tell them, you know, like for example, I usually try and say something like, well, you know, you're going to have to compromise today. And some people say a good mediation, everybody goes home happy. Some people say a good mediation, everybody goes home equally more or less unhappy. From my perspective, you got some of what you wanted. You didn't get all of what you wanted, but you didn't take the risk of getting none of what you wanted. That kind of a phrase, I don't want to be reading that, or even I don't want a cheat sheet telling me to say it, because now I'm looking at the thing and I'm not looking at the widow.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
or I mediated a case, you know, you're talking about terrible cases. Like I mediated a case where a woman wasn't feeling well, so she phoned 911. The ambulance came to the house.
Wow.
Ambulance attendants decided, this is against the law, that she wasn't sick enough, so they didn't take her to the hospital. Okay, that's against the law. The ambulance, you call the ambulance got to take you to the hospital. There are no exceptions at all to that if you call the ambulance. Okay, if I'm walking on the street with you, Josiah, and you fall down and I call the ambulance, okay, then there is discretion. If you say you don't want to go,
Right.
you don't have to go, but you didn't call the ambulance. I did. Okay. Yeah. And that could be in one of two contexts. Either we're going to lunch and we know each other, or you're going in one direction, I'm going in the other direction. We don't know each other. You fall down, I call the ambulance. 22 hours later, and the 22 hours matters. She called 911 again. Some paramedics who knew what they were doing took her to the hospital. By the time she got there, she was unconscious. They didn't know what was wrong with her. 7 doctors descended on her because they didn't know what was wrong with her, and she was unconscious and she was well on her way to death. Okay, so they had a plastic surgeon, a general surgeon, a gastroenterologist, a gynecologist, an infectious diseases doctor, an emergency doctor, and I forget what the 7th was. It doesn't matter. They don't know what's wrong with her. So one of the surgeons grabs a scalpel. She's unconscious and slices into her leg because it looked a bit strange. It looked to him like it might be necrotizing fasciitis. All right. Anyway, he looked at the muscle. The muscle looked like it was more or less intact. He concluded that it was not necrotizing fasciitis, but they took a pathology sample to figure out what it was, and they hit her with every antibiotic known to mankind, which they normally don't do. Normally, they want to figure out what the bacterial infection is before they pick an antibiotic. But here, if they wait around to figure out what it is, she's going to be dead before they figure out what it is. So they had no place to go but up, and they hit her with every antibiotic known to mankind. Okay, turned out it was necrotizing fasciitis. She ended up with amputations of both arms and both legs. Okay, now, if I have that person in front of me, and I did, right, I better be alert to the devastation that's dumped on this unsuspecting person's head. Right. And if I don't get it, that's a serious problem. And it ties into this business with Zoom. I don't know whether these remote platforms are good or bad. They're clearly bad in some cases, and they're clearly good in others. It's just I have difficulty defining when the Zoom or whatever platform you're using is good and when it's not good. So the best I can do with that is, if it's a high emotion case, I don't care about how much money it's worth. If it's a high emotion case, by and large, it's better to do them in person. If it's a low emotion case, even if it involves $10 million, if you have two insurance companies fighting about a subrogated claim when somebody's house burned down, okay, and the insurance company pays its insured and then wants to get the money back from the next door neighbor who started the fire, if they're fighting over $5 million, I don't care. We can do that on Zoom because that's not high emotion. Okay, there's two insurance companies getting involved in a rumble. We can do that on Zoom. But if it's high emotion, then we shouldn't be doing it. Anyway, that's a long answer to your question.
No, but very, very important and insightful. Like, I think that's also, and I agree, very important to establish a rapport with the clients, more important than checking off a checklist of all these items, for sure. Just switching gears a little bit more, our next question for you is, what is the most common misconception that people have about mediation before they participate? Yeah. Both a client's misconceptions and maybe a lawyer's misconception as well.
Well, I'm not sure that the lawyers have a lot of misconceptions. Let's start with the client, and we'll then finish with the lawyer. By the time the clients show up on a mediation, their lawyers told them what's going on, okay, or at least the good ones do. To bring a plaintiff in some sort of personal injury case or an insurance claim to a mediation without explaining to the person what the mediation is very bad lawyering. So they shouldn't be hearing about this for the first time when I spend 20 minutes at the beginning talking to them, okay? But one of the things I think that they probably think, or they did think before their lawyer told them to the contrary, is that somehow the mediator has the power to make people do something, okay? So I've never had a plaintiff come in and say, well, you know, I understand why my credibility is being questioned. They come in and say, well, you know, my barber's cousin's uncle got $400,000 for an amputated left pinky. And, you know, that's the expectation. When plaintiffs show up with expectations like that, it becomes important to address the expectations. And usually their lawyer will tell me, usually, okay? I'm not even sure if it's usually. Let's say 50% of the time. So I have to do what's called reality testing. So the question is, am I doing reality testing on fertile ground? In other words, does the plaintiff's lawyer agree with me? And the problem is a client management problem where the plaintiff thinks his case is worth $1 million and it's just simply not worth $1 million. It's worth $100,000. Okay, something like that. Now, the good plaintiff's lawyers are going to tell me either the day before or they'll tell me that day. Say, Frank, I want to talk to you privately. Okay. Then he says to me, now I have to do reality testing. So for me to say in a slip and fall case, and they're very, very dicey cases, they can go down the drain. Medical malpractice case. Okay, those aren't sure winners. So when I go into the room at 4 o'clock after we've gone back and forth 5 or 6 times, and I say to the plaintiff, you know, this is a slip and fall case, and you can lose. It's better if I know what the lawyer has told his client, because then it may shape exactly how I do it when I know that I'm not stepping at least on the lawyer's toes. You follow me? So the lawyer says to me at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Frank, look, I've been telling him what you're telling him for the last 5 years. Okay, you're a free agent. Do what you got to do. It makes it easier, right? Makes it easier. Now, it shouldn't determine whether I do it at all, and it won't. So I'm kind of like John Fiddler, but John Fiddler is John Fiddler at 10 a.m. and I only become John Fiddler at 3 or 4 o'clock because it's a more gentle way of doing it. Yeah, so that's the misconception, I think, of a client. That's one misconception, that somehow the mediator is going to make the bad guys do what they don't want to do. That's the first thing. The bad guys being the insurance companies when you're dealing with plaintiffs. And the other misconception is they don't understand how the justice system works. They think it's a justice system. It's not. Okay, it's not a justice system. It's a methodology for dealing with risk. Okay, it's in a way, and the clients don't understand that. I've never met a plaintiff who ever thought he or she didn't have a great case.
Right.
Well, they have a great case. Everybody's got a great case. You know, I don't know if you ever asked yourself this question after starting law school, but every time a lawsuit goes to court, there's a winner and there's a loser. Okay. In the context of a civil case, it applies in criminal cases too. But, you know, if you're Paul Bernardo and you're charged with what he was charged with, so you plead not guilty, you know that you're going to be found guilty. There's a 1 in a million chance. So, but what's the alternative? What's the alternative? Plead guilty?
Right.
Now, in a civil case, there is an alternative. Settle the case.
Yeah.
Settle it. Don't go to court. So here's what we have. We have a dynamic where I go to court acting for the plaintiff thinking I'm going to win. Josiah, you go to court on behalf of the defendant thinking that you're going to win. And 50% of us are wrong in every single case. Right. Now, they've not heard that from anybody. And then just in case they don't get it, I make it manifestly clear to them by telling them something like, you know, if you go over to the courthouse in Toronto, there might be 50 courtrooms there. Okay. Let's say every day 5 or 6 cases finish. Okay. The other cases are ongoing. The next day, another 5 or 6 finish. So I just told you that if the 5 or 6 that finish today, 50% of the lawyers are losers. Okay. Now, the lawyers go to the gowning room, they take their gowns off. By the time they hit the ground floor, nobody's ever lost a case. It's the most amazing thing. Okay. So now they start thinking about that, and they should. And in case they're still wondering about why I'm taking shots at their chances of winning, okay, I tell them, go on my website and click on perspectives, and you'll see a decision of Judge Rapson. In a case at the end of a 5-day jury trial, I thought I won. The defense lawyers both thought I won, and the trial judge thought I won. Okay, the jury had a question. I was in my gown, sitting in a fellow judge's chambers because my client was a judge's sister. And they call me in with the other 2 lawyers. Judge has to talk to us. He says, I have a question from the jury. The question is, if we dismiss your case, Frank, what do we do about costs? He says, doesn't look very good for you, Mr. Gomberg. 30 years ago. I'll remember it like it happened yesterday. I started laughing. He says, what are you laughing for? I said, because that's the understatement of the year. Anyway, go on. So what I tell him, go on my website. Okay, hit perspectives. You'll see a picture of an elevator. Click on the elevator. Read what the judge said. And then when we get back together again 15 minutes from now, you tell me how you're going to win your case, how you can guarantee it. Because that's a case that no lawyer could lose. It was unlosable. I was a young lawyer and I didn't lose it because of the advocacy. Okay, the advocacy was more than passable. I'm not telling you I was Clarence Darrow, but what I'm telling you is on a scale of 1 to 10, I was a solid 7. And that was plenty good enough for all 4 legally trained people in the courtroom, right? The judge, the 2 lawyers for the defense, and me, 4 legally trained people. Now, what we do on mediations is we tell people we can't predict the future. Of course, you can't predict the future. If somebody's there and they've had their limbs amputated, if she could predict the future, then she wouldn't have had her limbs amputated because she would have gone to the hospital on her own, let alone with an ambulance. Okay, and it wouldn't have happened. So when people start telling me about how they're going to win their cases, my answer is, what crystal ball are you looking into? Because I wish I had it. If I had it, I'd be buying futures in Bitcoins. I wouldn't be mediating cases. No, seriously. So, you know, I said, and by the way, your lawyer's going to tell you when I leave here, he's going to tell you or she's going to tell you that what I told you is 100% right. Because it's like gravity. There's certain things that your lawyer and I may disagree on. Okay, liability. We could disagree on liability. Left car makes a left turn in front of another car, and there's a big hullabaloo about the color of the light. I don't know what the jury's going to do with that. But when the victim says, well, you know, I'm going to be, I'm going to recover 100% here because this is clearly the other guy's fault. Say, really? That's why we have jury trials. And by the way, your lawyer's never gone to court in advance thinking he's going to lose the case, and neither is the other lawyer. So we got a problem because one of them is going to be wrong. Okay, that usually shakes them up a bit. That addresses your question. It's a long answer to a short question. The question is, what's the misconception? The answer is that because somebody gets hurt or because they feel that they've been hurt, either physically or emotionally, we're talking about contract cases, right? People feel, well, you know, I was honest with him, he wasn't honest with me, and we're fighting over, you know, the extra cost of the million widgets that had to be produced. So maybe that too has some emotion in it, but nobody knows what's going to happen. And the reality is that, just in case they don't believe me when I tell them that, who's going to decide the case? A jury? 6 strangers picked at random from the community. Now there's talk about getting rid of jury trials here for a number of reasons. Okay, they're expensive, number one. Number two, they take longer. And number three, this COVID stuff has put the emphasis on the fact that we don't necessarily want to be putting a bunch of people in a room, you know, 150 waiting to go into a courtroom to maybe be selected for membership on a jury. But you know, if it's not a jury, then it's a judge. Who's a judge? A judge is a lawyer who the federal government made a judge. So if you're appointed a judge on Tuesday night, you're no smarter on Wednesday than you were on Tuesday. Okay? And if you did family law or you taught wills and trusts at Osgoode, and all of a sudden you're thrown into judging a medical negligence case or a dental negligence case or a fight over the metallurgical properties of something that's broken and caused injuries, you know, like a trailer hitch. There's a big fight about whether it's the retailer's fault, the wholesaler's fault, the manufacturer's fault. Then there's sale of goods issues, but only vis-a-vis the person who sold it. Okay, there are tort issues, contract issues, exculpatory clause issues, and you're going to hand it to a judge who was appointed 2 weeks ago and who taught, you know, oil and gas at some law school someplace. Doesn't make sense. And by the way, if you fall down and break your leg tonight and the bone's sticking out of the flesh and they take you by ambulance to the hospital, you don't get the next doctor in line. You don't get the next doctor in line. We give you the next judge in line. How does that make sense? You get an orthopedic surgeon. Okay. If they give you the next doctor in line, you might get a psychiatrist. What's he going to do? Or she going to tell you, hey, you don't really have a broken leg, and talk you out of it and send you home? No. Or you go and it's a urologist or a gynecologist or somebody like that dealing with a bone that's sticking out from your leg. I mean, if you could devise a less predictable system, I don't know what it would be. And that's our system. Is it good? People say, Frank, sounds like you're cynical. I'm not cynical. What's the alternative? Okay. The alternative is we go back to the way things used to be, like 500 years ago. You know, you don't like something, you go and beat the guy up. If you go to beat him up and he beats you up, then I guess that's the way the cookie crumbles. So we have a justice system which is very flawed, better than the alternative, but flawed. So if, you know, Josiah, you bang into Stefania in the middle of the night, the two of you are driving in different directions. Okay. No witnesses, no alcohol, no drugs, no nothing. You break your leg, she breaks her leg. You say you went through a green, she says that she went through a green. I'm a jury. What am I going to do?
Right.
Good luck. Good luck.
Mm-hmm.
Good luck with that. Because one of the things that people don't know, a lot of lawyers don't know it either, is that the jury has to make a call there. The jury can't just say we don't know, and under the Negligence Act, it's 50-50. Can't do that. Okay? Can't do that. Negligence Act says you apportion when the jury can't come to a conclusion where there are multiple tortfeasors. Well, one of you, either Josiah or Stefania, you're not a tortfeasor. One of you is, one of you isn't. Negligence Act doesn't apply. When Josiah is giving his evidence, he's nervous, he's jumping all over the place, and turns his back on your lawyer when your lawyer Stefania is cross-examining him. When you give your evidence, you're cool, you're calm, you'll collect it. You even acknowledge that you were driving too fast. I'm the judge. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you've heard the evidence, you've seen the witnesses testify. All right. Stefania even admitted that she was driving too fast. You can take that into account in terms of assessing her credibility. Right? So what happens? Everybody goes out, they come back, they probably find that Stefania went through the green light. Why? Because she looked better in terms of the way she gave her evidence. Not only that, she admitted she was driving too fast. Okay, so what happens now? You lose the case, Josiah. Okay, that's nice. Now what happens is this: a year later, somebody finds a video camera, and the video camera shows that Josiah, you went through the green light. So what happened? I'll tell you what happened. You dump a difficult case into a flawed system, and you get out of it the same thing you put into it. Okay. And we call that juries or judges making findings of fact. And once the jury makes a finding of fact that Stefania went through the green, reality is displaced by that finding of fact. That's why people mediate cases when you cut to the core. That's why doing it a different way is better, because it doesn't force the fact finder into making a potentially incorrect finding of fact. And wouldn't it be a tragedy if the person with the amputated arms and the amputated legs, wouldn't it be a tragedy if the jury accepts the defense expert who on causation says that if she'd been taken to the hospital 22 hours earlier, the result would have been the same. So that's a causation situation, and it's bad news bears, because while we're allocating blame, we're getting it wrong a fair bit of the time.
Right. Yeah, no, those are definitely some thought-provoking analogies. And kind of on a similar note to some of the misconceptions that people have about mediation, we were also hoping to hear about like what you found to be the most challenging about practicing mediation.
I think that what's challenging is that at the end of a day, where you're dealing with something that's really, really sad, all we can do is, I said this in a different way a minute ago, all we can do is shuffle around money. It doesn't seem like it's enough, but that's all we can do. So at the end of the day, my job is finished. It's a one-off, right? But the person who the neurosurgeon pulled a tumor out of his head, instead of going a little more slowly and doing it more deftly, and he's now basically he's in horrible shape with a brain injury for 8 years until he died. And then OHIP wants to get paid back the $6 million or $7 million that it paid to keep him in a warehouse. I don't mean that literally, for 8 years. That's what's challenging about it, because the problems don't go away.
Right.
I just have a different one tomorrow. And, you know, if you're a thoughtful person, you say to yourself, boy, there but for the grace of God go I. And I think that the people who think that way, John's one of them, John Fiddler's one of them, Cliff Handler's another, Paul Torrey's another. The people who approach it that way, I think, forge sort of commonality with the people who are suffering. And I don't talk to them about the people who are suffering. The word closure is anathema. You never, you don't talk to them about closure. There's no closure. Right. In 1998, client's daughter was killed at Sick Kids Hospital when they gave her morphine and didn't monitor her. Okay, famous case called Shore. So we had a coroner's inquest, and the hospital, the nurses lied and cheated and did everything they could to obfuscate what really happened. What really happened is they didn't attach the girl to a monitor. So you see, when the morphine, if there's too much morphine, your system can react badly to morphine. What does it do? It starts closing down. Well, if you're attached to a monitor and they set it, 15 heartbeats a minute, on your way to being dead, your heart goes to less than 15 beats a minute. There, an alarm goes off. And the same thing with your breathing. So they attach to a monitor, they say. Well, why didn't it beep? Why didn't it beep? They say it did beep. The mother's lying right next to the daughter. You're in the hospital lying next to your kid and the monitor beeps. What do you think you do? You wake up.
Right.
Yeah. How about if it happened 3 times, according to Sick Kids? 3 times. Then they turned it off. What would you do if the monitor wasn't working? You turn and you reset it 3 times. Tell you what most people would do. They'd go and get another monitor. Mm-hmm. Okay, like common sense. Okay, so what happens now? Because they push the thing through, we now have a coroner's inquest, and the jury comes back and they say homicide on Sick Kids Hospital. Now that's not in a criminal context. Now what happens? The nurses get charged criminally. You know why? This whole thing was because they didn't tell the truth. The truth. So when there is a truth, and what's the truth? When Stefania says she went through a green light and you say, Josiah, you went through a green light. What's the truth? It's ephemeral. So we're dealing with ephemeral stuff, and we're trying to do it in a patterned way. That's what the court system is, right? It's deciding cases in a patterned way. That's what stare decisis is. Right? So unfortunately, the patterned way is patterned. That's why we call it a patterned way. Okay, there is a flow to it. And if this happens, then this happens. And if that happens, then that happens. And if you don't wear a seatbelt, you're up to 25% at fault. Why? Because that's what the case law says. Okay? Case law is just trying to put some order into something so that there's some predictability to it. The reality is there's no predictability to any of this stuff. And that's why a mediated solution, I'm not advertising that it's the be all and the end all, because I think some cases are probably inappropriate to be mediated. Power imbalance cases. Okay, power imbalance cases. However, you might ask yourself, this case that looks like a power imbalance because some Coca-Cola bottle blew up and took a guy's eye out. It looks like a big fight that David is the guy with the missing the eye and Goliath is Coca-Cola. It may not be so. Maybe the Goliath is the guy who's lost the eye, because Coca-Cola may have a bunch of interests that are best satisfied by paying out $1 million.
Yeah, sadly.
So you don't know who David is and who Goliath is. This is a humane way of trying to resolve disputes. It won't appropriately deal with the bully. Right? You have a bully there. The lawyer can't control the bully. And for sure, the mediator can't control the bully. The only thing that controls the bully is an adverse result at a trial. And that's why trials are important, because sometimes the cases just have to go there, because you can't have a terrorist running the show. And a terrorist's not going to get it what he or she wants in a civil lawsuit just because they want it. They may get it at mediation. They may get it pre-mediation by negotiating. Maybe the predatory style that the person has worked for him or her for his or her whole life. Donald Trump is a good example. And I wasn't thinking about that in advance. Okay. But at some point, at some point, somebody says, no, you're not going to get what you want, and we're going to punish your bad behavior. And the thing with bad behavior is what we should all do is we should figure out a way to condemn it. Instead, what happens is the people who engage in bad behavior get rewarded. It works. So what do they do? They engage in more bad behavior. So at least on a mediation, you can try. If that doesn't work, then go to court and hope that justice prevails. But the chances are sort of like 50-50 on that. Mm-hmm. Anyway, that's a big, long speech in response to a question. I'm sorry.
No, don't apologize. It's a very interesting way to put it. And I can see how there can be that many challenges with mediation. But yes, we have our final question now, and maybe one of the most important ones. So what is one thing that you want everyone, students, Osgoode generally, to know about mediation?
I think that the people who mediate in a thoughtful way are there to display some understanding and compassion for the human elements of a case, which are often lost in the context of a black letter law approach. So jury trial or a judge trial, there's more humanity in a jury trial. But trying to predict what a jury is going to do is the same thing as trying to predict what a judge is going to do. It's impossible. And just to get back to what we were talking about earlier with everybody thinking that I had won this case, we talk about predictions, right? We can't predict the future, because the person who gets into a car accident tonight, and I'm mediating their case 3 years from now, they didn't think they were going to get into an accident tonight, because if they thought they're going to get into an accident tonight, they'd stay home and watch the hockey game. So here's the question. How do we deal with people like that, even if they have a lousy case on liability? If we don't do it in a compassionate way, then they walk out thinking that the justice system is a crock. And the problem is, like, for example, in the United States now with the Supreme Court of the United States, where you can predict in advance what the judges are going to do because of their backgrounds, there has to be some reckoning, because otherwise society is going to lose confidence in a system which is supposed to be blind to who's involved in it. And it's not so. So if at the end of a 1 week trial, the 4 legally trained people in the room thought I won, by the way, prediction is trying to predict what's going to happen in the future. What do you call it when 4 legally trained people look backwards on something that just happened over a week? There's no word for that. Yeah, I guess it's predicting. You're predicting what's going to happen in an hour, but you're predicting what's going to happen in an hour based on what's happened over the previous 40 hours. And how could 4 legally trained people get it so wrong? Well, maybe we got it right and the jury got it wrong. That's what Judge Rapson says in those 15 pages. That's the only time that I know of in the history of civil litigation in Ontario, the only time ever, where the trial judge on the record says he thinks the jury's whacked out. Okay, because normally it doesn't come up. What's the judge going to say? Thanks for your verdict. I think you're crazy. And then write something down. The reason that he did it in this case was because there was an argument about costs. And he said to the defendant, you can have the costs if demanded. That's a clue. So they wanted the costs. So I went back there and we argued whether the judge should set aside the jury verdict. I knew he wasn't going to do that. And he didn't. But what he did do is what I told the other lawyer he was going to do is he was going to change his costs order. Now the action's dismissed without costs. And the judge has to tell you why. Well, the why is because the jury was whacked out. That's why. All right. So you're asking me what I want the public to know. What I want the public to know, and this includes law students and lawyers and whoever else is interested, is if you think when you go to to court that you're going to have some assurance that things are going to turn out your way, okay, you're making a serious mistake. And what we're trying to do is not to compound a medical tragedy. Your arms and your legs are gone. And we're going to superimpose on that a legal tragedy. We can't do that. If we do that, we failed everybody. And some days I wake up and I say, I can't believe that people are paying me to do this, because this is the best thing in the world that you can do. Try and help people in the context of lawsuits. So that's the answer, I think, to your question.
Great answer.
Yeah, thank you so much. So thank you all for watching, and thank you again to Frank Gomberg for joining us this evening.
If you have any more questions about mediation, you can always reach out to us at the Osgoode Mediation Clinic at osgoodemc@gmail.com or on Instagram at Osgoode Mediation Clinic.